He was already dying when the sun went down. We don't know his name, we never will. But we know his face, or at least the shape it left behind. We know the arc of his right arm, which ended at the elbow. We know the compressed socket of his left eye. We know the angle his spine held when he could no longer straighten it. We know all of this because, roughly 60,000 years ago, in a cave in what is now northern Iraq, someone placed him on the ground and stayed. His name, the one researchers gave him, is Shanidar 1. And what happened inside his body in the hours before he stopped, the exact cascade, the precise sequence, the final signals his cells sent out, is the same cascade your body runs. Right now. Every night. Just quietly, in the background, waiting. By the time you understand what that means, the dying process you think you know will look completely different. Because the biggest thing you've never heard about ancient human death is not how violent it was, it's how familiar it was. And there is one moment buried inside the last minutes of nearly every ancient human who ever died, that researchers have only just begun to document, a moment that changes what we think the final seconds felt like. Hold that, we'll get there. But first, we follow Shanidar 1 into the dark. The cave sits in the Zagros Mountains of what is now the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Ralph Solecki and his team from Columbia University excavated it between 1957 and 1961. What they found inside a single layer of sediment, roughly 6 meters below the surface, were the partial skeletal remains of at least 10 Neanderthals. Shanidar 1 was the most complete, and his bones told a story that nobody had expected. The crushing blow to his left eye socket, healed, a fracture pattern consistent with a direct impact, possibly a falling rock, possibly something worse, that had left him partially blind and possibly deaf on that side. That injury had closed over, the bone remodeled, the person survived. A right arm, stunted and atrophied from a developmental anomaly or catastrophic early damage, amputated sometime in life at the elbow. Not freshly, not at death, long before. The stump end had healed smooth. He had lived without that arm for years. Degenerative joint disease in his knees, ankles, and one foot, consistent with decades of compensated movement, the body routing force around a primary injury until everything downstream breaks down, slowly, joint by joint. The Smithsonian Institution's Human Origins program estimates he died between 35 and 45 years old. Think about what 35 to 45 years old looked like inside a body that had taken that much damage. Every joint in that lower body was inflamed. Not sometimes chronically, prostaglandins, the chemical signals that sustain localized inflammation, were flooding the tissue around every weight-bearing surface with each step he took. Interleukin-6, a cytokine the body releases under conditions of chronic mechanical stress and injury, would have been circulating at elevated levels for years. Chronic elevated interleukin-6 accelerates what immunologists now call inflammaging, the background hum of systemic inflammation that researchers at Nature Reviews Immunology identify as one of the core drivers of biological deterioration in aging tissue. He was not old, he just felt it. Now, the moment the dying began. In the ancient world, roughly 75% of human deaths in the Paleolithic era were caused by infection, according to a 2018 analysis by Lee Goldman, Dean of the Faculties of Health Sciences and Medicine at Columbia University, published in JAMA Internal Medicine. Not violence, not predators, not starvation. Infection, that number is almost certainly what took Shanidar 1 in the end. Though we can't know for certain. What we do know is the biology of how infection kills. And it starts with a process you feel every time you run a fever, only, in Shanidar 1's case, there was no aspirin, no IV drip, no hospital room, just a cave floor, and whoever chose to stay with him. The infection entered through a wound, a dental abscess, a compromised respiratory tract. In the pre-antibiotic world, even a dental abscess carried a fatality rate of 10 to 40%. The pathogen breached the body's first-line barriers. White blood cells swarmed the site. Cytokines fired. The hypothalamus read the chemical signal and ordered a fever, core body temperature climbing above 38 degrees Celsius, then 39, then possibly higher. Fever is not the disease. Fever is the weapon. The body deliberately raises its internal temperature to create an environment hostile to bacterial replication. Most bacteria evolve to operate optimally at 37 degrees. Raise it to 39.5, and their protein machinery begins to fail. The ancient human in the grip of a high fever was not being damaged by the sickness was being fought. But fighting costs energy. And at 40 degrees Celsius, the body's own enzymes start to lose their shape. Proteins denature, neurons misfire. Coherent thought becomes difficult. This is where the dying person goes quiet. If Shanidar I was conscious through the early stages of his final illness, he would have felt something you recognize: the bone ache of a high fever. Every joint already compromised by decades of mechanical damage would have become acutely, searingly painful as the inflammatory cascade amplified the existing inflammation. The cytokine storm layering on top of the chronic baseline. His left side, the damaged eye, the withered shoulder, would have been the site of concentrated agony as circulation changed and nerve signals fluctuated. But here is what the body does next. Here is what nobody says out loud. When pain reaches a threshold, when the body registers damage at a level that threatens functional shutdown, the hypothalamus activates the endogenous opioid system. Beta-endorphins flood the bloodstream. Enkephalins release at synaptic junctions throughout the pain processing network. These are not metaphors. These are the body's own morphine. Molecule for molecule, beta-endorphin binds to the same mu-opioid receptors that pharmaceutical opioids bind to. And in moments of extreme physiological crisis, severe hemorrhage, uncontrolled infection, terminal organ failure, the body releases them in concentrations that clinical researchers describe as potentially analgesic at a level no external drug could safely replicate. The ancient human dying from infection past the crisis point, past the window where intervention could help, was almost certainly being chemically protected from the full weight of what was happening. Pain that should have been catastrophic was muffled. There is a name for this: stress-induced analgesia. It is well documented in trauma literature, and it is one reason why people who survive near fatal accidents report not feeling the pain of their injuries until the danger had passed. The system gates catastrophic pain during the moments when experiencing it fully would accelerate death. Evolution did not build a body that tortures itself on the way out. It built a body that cushions the exit. If that just changed something in how you picture this, good, hit like. What we're about to get into is the part that almost no one knows. Because what happened inside Shanidar I's brain in the final minutes is not what anyone assumed. Jimo Borjigin is a neuroscientist at the University of Michigan. In 2013, her team published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences measuring brain activity in rats during cardiac arrest. What they found stopped the field. In the 30 seconds immediately following cardiac arrest, the moment the heart stopped and oxygen supply to the brain was cut, the rats' brains produced a surge of coordinated gamma wave activity that was, quote, more coherent and interconnected than during waking consciousness. The highest frequency waves the brain can generate, the ones associated with focused attention, complex perception, memory retrieval, and conscious experience. After the heart stopped, not before. After, in 2023, Borjigin's group followed up with a study published in the same journal, this time measuring dying humans, 4 comatose patients removed from life support. 2 of them showed a comparable surge. In one patient, gamma wave production spiked to nearly 300 times its previous baseline in the moments after cardiac arrest. 300 times. The brain, starved of oxygen, hypoxic, past the point of recovery, produced its most intense, measurable burst of organized electrical activity in the final seconds of life. Here is the reversal. And it is the one that changes everything that came before it. You have been imagining ancient human death as a narrowing, a dimming, a gradual reduction to darkness. The fever drops the person down, the organs fail, the brain goes quiet, it ends. That is not what the data shows. For at least some ancient humans, the ones who died from the causes we understand, the cardiac failure downstream of infection, the hemorrhagic shock downstream of trauma, the last measurable moment of the brain's existence was not silence. It was a surge. A flare of organized activity that no one has fully explained, but that researchers at Michigan Medicine describe as correlated with markers of conscious-like activity. The structures that lit up most intensely in those final seconds included the visual cortex, the posterior cortex, areas associated with vivid visual experience, and memory processing. We don't know what Shanidar 1 experienced in those final seconds. Nobody will ever know that. But we know the hardware was running. And we know the hardware was running harder than it ran during normal waking life. The question of whether that constitutes experience, whether those gamma waves carried something, is one that neuroscience cannot yet answer. Depending on who you ask, it is either the most important unresolved question in the field or a measurement artifact. Researchers still argue. The honest answer is, we don't fully know. What we do know is what surrounded him. This is where the science stops and the archaeology begins, and this is where Shanidar 1's story makes the turn that nobody who hears it ever quite shakes. He was buried. Not accidentally covered, not left where he fell. The arrangement of his remains, the sediment analysis, the deliberate positioning, all of it suggests intentional interment. At some point before the sediment sealed him in, someone placed him on the ground in a specific orientation, in the layers around the burial site. Researcher Ralph Solecki found concentrated clusters of pollen from at least 8 species of flowering plants: yarrow, groundsel, grape hyacinth, ephedra. Some researchers have challenged whether the pollen was intentionally placed or arrived via burrowing rodents. Others, including a 2023 analysis published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, argue that at least some of the pollen distribution is inconsistent with accidental deposition. But here is what the bones themselves tell us, without any ambiguity. He could not have survived alone, not for years, not with one eye, one arm, compromised hearing on one side, and joint disease severe enough to alter his gait. Someone fed him. Someone sheltered him. Someone made decisions about where to carry him when the group moved, and those decisions cost something: energy, resources, risk, for years, for most of his adult life. His death was not solitary. That is the thing that stays with you when you sit long enough with Shanidar 1. Not the violence he survived, not the long, slow burn of his last days. It's the presence of other people in every phase of what happened to him, the care that made the dying possible, and the care that happened after. Your body runs the same shutdown sequence his did, the same fever response, the same endogenous opioid release at the threshold of intolerable pain, the same gamma wave machinery firing in the final seconds. The same hormonal cushioning that evolution built into the architecture of dying, not because dying is designed to be painless, it isn't, but because the system was built by organisms that lived in groups, and those groups took care of their most damaged members, and the bodies of those members adapted accordingly. The endogenous opioid system exists because Shanidar 1 existed, because people like him existed, because the ones who didn't have that system screamed too loud, drew predators, destabilized the group, and left fewer descendants than the ones who went quiet with grace. Biology built the exit. Community made it human. One thing worth noticing before you go to sleep tonight: the last active moment of your brain, whenever it comes, will almost certainly be more electrically alive than any moment you can consciously remember. The dimming you fear is not what happens. The data says otherwise. What do you think you'd see in those final 30 seconds? And who would you want in that room?